the WACH Fox studios, this is On Point on WACH Fox with Cynthia Hardy.
Good morning and welcome to On Point on WACH Fox. It's a pleasure to bring you this show each and every week, and we still want to invite you to tune into our radio show, On Point with Cynthia Hardy, heard every Sunday evening, 6 p.m. on 101.3 The Big DM. This week on Point on Watch, the controversial issue of voter suppression tactics in South Carolina and around the country. Is the democratic process under attack as we approach the 2012 elections? Some say restrictions are being designed or implemented nationwide to suppress voter turnout. Just last week, the United Steelworkers, concerned about the issue, announced plans to hold open discussions around the country. While some point to an organized effort to minimize voting among some groups, supporters say they're just trying to protect the integrity of the process. Today, we hear from both sides of the issue. This week on Point on Watch, the controversial issue of possible voter suppression in the 2012 election. I'm seated with my favorite WACH Fox news anchor, and I'm always delighted for this part of the week to have the opportunity to not just do the show, but to have an opportunity for your exchange on the issue, because I think it's really important. Now, Brian, we've done a number of shows on issues that would impact the vote in 2012, but we've not quite had one that looked specifically at efforts to curtail people's right to vote in 2012.
Well, the first example that comes up that is the rallying cry or the linchpin of a lot of these debates is the voter ID issue, which we haven't heard a lot about in the past month or so, but in the past it didn't seem that a week or a day went by where there wasn't some type of debate going on both sides of the issue.
That's right.
Those for it, those against it, why it's important to each side. And there may even still be some confusion out there among some voters whether or not that is a law. That's right. Or that's going to be in effect.
That's right. In fact, in South Carolina, there does seem to be a lot of confusion because you've got Justice Department, they've had a say. You've got the League of Women Voters, they have weighed in on the issue. And then you have our Attorney General's office that's weighed in on the issue. And then you have the legislature. And what the legislature
There's even more than that.
So all of those different groups, same issue, and so it could be confusing to the populace. And what we'd like to do with our guest today, we want to thank Mr. Jim Felder, who is Executive Director of the South Carolina Voter Education Project, and Ms. Lynn Teague. And thank you very much for being here from the League of Women Voters. We wanted to, Brian and I wanted to launch the conversation by kind of talking about what he alluded to, the fact that there is a little bit of confusion out there, because for a long time all of our stories that dealt with voting in South Carolina were about the voter photo ID bill and whether or not it was a good idea or not. And so to update our viewers, if you would, on where we are on the voter photo ID bill and what has transpired since then.
Okay. First, there's a lot of confusion out there. I've spent the last 3 months traveling the state, meeting with groups, church groups, civic groups, explaining that the voter ID is not an issue for this election and trying to bring them up to speed as to where we are with it. And a lot of people still do not understand it, and it could have, a depressing effect on the upcoming election. But we're doing all we can to put the fire out, so to speak. What happened with that was because of the way the Justice Department announced its challenge. It came out December 27th, Christmas time. Who's paying attention to TV? And it was just one little blurb on a Friday night. So many people missed that. So they were assuming that they have to have a voter ID card to participate in this election. So we've been trying to dispel that as best we can, traveling and getting out newsletters and so forth.
Because there is going to be that possible delay before this ever goes into effect, is that giving you more of a chance, though, to educate everybody on what they need to have in the event that this becomes law?
It is, and we are telling to prepare as if you will need a voter ID. Check your voter registration card, be sure it's up to date, and get a photo ID of your driver's license, MV, motor vehicle, or what have you, but just in case, be ready. And a lot of people are getting to do that. But there was just so much confusion out there and misinformation about the voter ID.
Well, talk to us a little bit about what has happened with the Justice Department and what has happened with our Attorney General's office, because I think that's where the confusion is, because once you have a federal lawsuit filed, then we're talking about the issue again, and in a viewer's mind or a listener or a reader's mind, it may be that the issue is still in play.
Well, a lot of people think because the lawsuit is out there. They assume that with the legislature passing, with the governor signing it, that was it. When justice came in, then our Attorney General elect to oppose the decision that the Justice Department sent. So now it's in litigation. It's in D.C. before a three-judge panel, district court in Washington. That's where you have to take these complaints. He has spent or will spend $1.5 million tax dollars defending this craziness, but that's where it is as of this point. So people don't follow lawsuits closely, but that's where it is as of now. Will it affect the upcoming election? We're hoping not. It won't affect the primary, June primary, but the November election, it's up in the air.
That should give people enough time, should it
should,
to
yes,
do that.
Yes.
And at that point, if they don't have all their ducks in a row, do we have to say that's their fault?
At that point, you would say so, but you know, voters, not just apathy, they have so many other things to do, and they just don't keep up with this kind of stuff. So you got to keep putting it out there, hoping it will stick with them.
Ms. Teague, is voter suppression a real big issue for the 2012 election across the country and in South Carolina?
Yes, we think it is in the League. The League is involved nationally and in many states in these issues. Florida has had a number of problems, I think, that have been very public. Just in the past week, it's become clear that they were knocking people off the rolls, like a 93-year-old medal winner from World War II. Because his birth date was 2 years off on some document. In South Carolina, the League is involved on the side of the Department of Justice in the bill, in the court case over R-54, the photo ID bill. For some people, it will not be terribly hard to get the documents they want. For others, it will be much harder. And we are especially concerned, for instance, about elderly people.
Yes.
Many elderly people in South Carolina do not have birth certificates. They might have been born at home with a midwife or with a doctor, but not have a birth certificate.
And that was pretty common, I understand.
Yes.
In the 50s and 60s.
Yes,
it was.
Particularly for certain groups, African Americans in particular. They either there wasn't a colored hospital in their town, or they opted for the comfort of their own home, or maybe they couldn't afford it. I'm not certain which, but there's a large population of people, I understand, primarily in southern states, that utilized a midwife as their preference for having children.
But there are people all over the United States who do not have the kind of documentation that is being asked for here. Now, there are things that can be done. Anybody who has an active voter registration card, for instance, can, if they can get to an elections office, can get a photo ID made with their existing registration card. If this law is in effect at the time of the election, what they will not be able to do is walk in with that old blue card that we've all used for so many years. Many people think, well, who in today's world does not have a photo ID? Doesn't everybody to get on an airplane? Well, of course, the shocking news is that an elderly person in rural South Carolina may never have been on an airplane in their lives. If they had a driver's license, it might not be current anymore if they've given up driving. And in that case, it would no longer be something they could use. So they would have to go to the elections office with their registration card.
And that's if the voter photo ID bill
Yes.
were law.
Right.
But it is not law.
It's not law.
At present.
It's present.
At present, is there danger that come November 2012, it could be law?
Yes.
Real danger, because then you've got a short window to do what it says you have to do. Going down to the voter registration office, getting a voter MV from the Department of Motor Vehicles, or even going to the voter registration office. It's a hardship for some people out in the rural areas, and you've got to go all the way downtown or to the county seat in order to get your picture taken. So you're looking at a time frame that won't be enough for most people.
We need to go to break now and ask you guys to stick around. I think it would be helpful, Brian, if we had some discussion in the next segment about some of the tactics that are being used around the country that many people on the left are calling voter suppression tactics.
And why they believe they're being used.
And why they believe they're being used. So you guys stay tuned, and we'll discuss those when we come back.
You're watching On Point on WACH Fox with Cynthia Hardy on Columbia's own WACH Fox.
Welcome back to OnPoint on Watch Fox. Brian McConkie and I are talking to Lynn Teague with the League of Women Voters and Jim Felder with the South Carolina Voter Education Project about voter suppression tactics that people are discussing all over the country. And of course, some see it as voter suppression, some see it as an effort to maintain and protect the integrity of the right to vote. You say what to that issue when you hear that, that view from the left, from the right, that this is not voter suppression? These efforts are just to make sure we keep everybody honest.
If we had a real problem with fraud in voting, then I may be able to see that side. We don't have that problem in South Carolina, and for the most part, in the country, you don't have fraud. You have people not going out to vote. If we were voting 90%, then you say, well, maybe something is wrong. Well, that's not the case. When you're only voting 51% of your population, as we here in South Carolina do, you need to do everything you can to increase turnout as opposed to suppressing it. Tactics are being used. For example, Florida's cut back on the early voting, where they used to could go in, a month ahead of time. Now it's 2 weeks. South Carolina tried to do it with the voter ID bill. If it passes, it will cut back on early voting. But right now, listeners or viewers, nothing has happened. Everything is still the same in South Carolina. But around the country, you're seeing it almost uniform. These tactics to delay or decrease the amount of time for early voting, to put other restrictions in. It reminds you of 1876, after the election after the Civil War.
Why do you think we're seeing it now?
Well, it's political. Republicans are determined to retake the White House, whatever it takes to get it back. They were surprised this last time around, caught off guard, so to speak, when Obama got elected and the Democrats took the White House again. So all kind of planning, uniform planning throughout, I think, the Republican hierarchy to do whatever we can to take the White House back. And if suppressing votes is going to be one of the suppressed voting is going to be one of those tools we use, we'll use it.
That's quite a big charge, you guys.
Sure, there'd probably be some that would say out there, that's one heck of a conspiracy theory. And that we're going to go that far to try to keep the elderly away from the polls, to keep African Americans away from the polls, the poor away from the polls, because it seems counterproductive to the process.
These tactics are doing that. It will keep the elderly away. It will keep the poor away. It will keep Hispanics away.
The League is a nonpartisan group. And we are issue-oriented. We're not party-oriented. We're not candidate-oriented. We are deeply concerned with the integrity of the voting process. Our organization grew out of the suffragette movement. As our issues vice president likes to say, voting rights are in our DNA as an organization. So we try to do a systematic study and look objectively at what is going on outside of the party context. And what we see here is no evidence that there is a significant problem in this. There are problems with voting systems in the United States. The Pew Center on the states did a magnificent detailed study and found that, for instance, clerical errors in registration records are a problem. But the solution to that is not to make it harder for people to vote or harder for people to register. We have a very good bill that is going through the General Assembly that would enable people to register online. Now, that is not going to help somebody who's not computer literate. It's not going to help a lot of people. For those it does help, it will reduce errors because there won't be the clerical transfer of information. So, the League wants to look at where are our real problems. In the last election, 4 counties had significant problems in South Carolina. Orangeburg, Colleton, Lancaster, Richland, all had problems with the voting systems. And better audits are needed. A bill to provide for that got nowhere in the House this year. All of this concern, supposedly, for voter integrity, what happens when hundreds or thousands of votes are not counted? That's a big issue for the integrity of the process. And that seems not to get as much attention as this effort to, for instance, get people who may not even have a birth certificate, but who may have been voting for many, many decades, to get documents that are hard for them to get.
Finally, before we leave this segment, I would like to wrap up by asking you to give our viewers any tidbit of information that you would like to leave with them in reference to what they need to do if they do have concern. They may be a college student, they may be older.
College students, ones we're really concerned about, because first they seem to have gotten really excited about the elections 4 years ago. Now they seem turned off because of the process and the systems that are in place. But they need to check to be sure that they are registered where they are staying in the dormitories, or if you're going to do an absentee ballot at home, but do whatever needs to be done to get registered. The elderly, the League does a great job of looking out for the elderly, and we have to continue to do that, and we have to continue to get the word out. We need to get the churches more involved in helping us spread the word on Sunday mornings.
The League is looking at a systematic project that we're starting to try to educate everyone on what would be needed, assuming the worst case, that this law goes into effect, which for us is a worst case. We probably won't know until very soon before the election. The case will not be heard in district court until the end of July, early August. The court decision will come perhaps as much as a month or more later. We are going to try to register people, encourage everyone to register. We know that there is an incorrect rumor that a bill passed that would make it more difficult to register voters in South Carolina. That bill, in fact, died in the House.
So we are still registering people
Yes.
at voter registration drive.
Yes.
That information is really important, and I think people don't know that.
Right.
That's going to have to be our last word, you guys. We certainly do appreciate you, Lynn Teague from the League of Women Voters, and of course, Mr. Jim Felder from the South Carolina Voter Education.
Bottom line is take steps now.
Right.
Make sure you got everything ready.
That's right. Coming up, we're going to hear from First Vice Chair of the South Carolina Democratic Party, Mr. Jamie Harrison, along with Republican lawyer Todd Kincannon on the controversial issue of voter suppression. You guys stay tuned.
You're watching On Point on Watch Fox with Cynthia Hardy on Columbia's own Watch Fox.
Welcome back to On Point on Watch Fox. Brian McConkie and I are talking about the controversial issue of voter suppression in the 2012 election, efforts that many say could deny voting rights to a host of citizens, including minorities and college students, low-income workers, first-time voters, a lot of people. Supporters of the effort say it isn't voter suppression, but actually efforts to protect the integrity of the vote. We thought we would ask a Democratic friend and Republican friend to join us in the discussion so that we can have a lively exchange of ideas. And so we welcome Mr. Jamie Harrison, who is First Vice Chair of the South Carolina Democratic Party, and Todd Kincannon. You're the former exec of the South Carolina Republican Party. And so let's just get right on into it. Voter suppression, is it a real issue or not?
It really is a real issue, and it's something that a lot of people are very, very concerned about. Just yesterday, I think the Congressional Black Caucus and faith leaders had a summit, a call to action, because in the African American community in particular, they're very, very, very concerned about the impact that this could have on black voters this election cycle.
Todd, what say you to that?
Here's the problem. You have to show a photo ID to do hundreds of different things in this country. And I know that was controversial when it started, when people started having to show a photo ID to buy alcohol, buy cigarettes. You have to show a photo ID to go in the White House. You have to show a photo ID to go in a federal courthouse. If showing a photo ID was the end of the world, then I think we would have heard about it before now. It just hasn't happened. And I haven't heard protests about, well, these people aren't allowed to set foot on White House grounds. Where are these protests? Where have they been? They're not there, and the reason is it's just not a real issue. It's a lot of smoke and mirrors, frankly, from Democrats who find that this is a way to motivate their base to get out in the election. I mean, that's fine. You know, they're trying to get their voters out to vote with a little bit of a scare tactic, but that's all this is. It's just a scare tactic.
Well, speaking of scare tactics, a number of people who are critical of the efforts around the country actually say the Republican Party is running scared, and the reason the Republican Party is backing so many efforts around the country that appear that would have the adverse effect of keeping people from the polls is because there's such a deep hatred of the current administration that by any means necessary that the party wants to take back the White House.
Republicans have been concerned about voter fraud since 1960. John F. Kennedy probably wouldn't have been president if a lot of dead people hadn't voted for him in Illinois. That's an old story. And frankly, when you get down to it, I think that Republicans are concerned because we tend to think that the fraud disproportionately benefits Democrats. I think all Republicans care about, at least the Republicans I deal with, All they care about are the votes that are cast be legal votes. If illegal votes change the result of an election, that disenfranchises everybody, every single voter.
Is there a problem with that mentality, Jamie? That
Well,
you want everything to be on the up and up?
There are a lot of problems with what Todd just said. I mean, yes, you do need to have an ID to go to the White House. You do need to have an ID to get on planes. But how many poor people do we know in South Carolina who actually go to the White House and get on planes? And that's the question and the problem. I mean, that's what we need to address here, is the fact that there are a lot of folks who are hardworking people who get up every day, feed their kids and all, and they don't have those IDs. Hey, my grandfather passed away in 2004. He was diabetic. He had amputations. He lost his driver's license. The last thing, he passed away in November 2004. The last thing that I did with my grandfather was vote in that 2004 presidential election. Had he been alive today and this law be in effect, he would not, because he didn't have a driver's license. He was born at home, so he didn't have a birth certificate. He would not have been able to vote in this presidential election. That's a problem. That is a big, big problem, because that man worked his whole life very hard since he was 6 years old, dragging bags of cotton. But he worked hard. He took care of his family. And so our issue is, how do we address that population of folks here? During the Iraqi war, Republicans went on the floor of the House of Representatives proud that the Iraqis had their purple fingers in voting. But we're finding every way here to suppress the vote. We're cutting early voting, and you can't tell me that's the ID issue. Why are you going to cut the window of voting? In America, we should want every single American who can to go out there and vote, to exercise that right that is so important, so sacrament to who we are as a people. And so we really need to address these things, because I don't think it's racial. I think it's political. It is purely political, and it just happens to have racial undertones to it, because various groups vote disproportionately for one party or another.
We got to go to break, or can we get Todd before we go to break? Can we get Todd's comment?
We'll have to get him right when we come back.
All right.
All right, he gets the first word.
When we come back, we're going to continue our discussion with Jamie Harrison, Democratic representative, and Republican Representative Todd Concannon. You guys stay with us.
You're watching On Point on WACH Fox with Cynthia Hardy on Columbia's own WACH Fox.
Welcome back to On Point on WACH Fox. We're talking voter suppression. We've got Jamie Harrison here from the Democratic side, and Todd Concannon.
And we promised Todd that he get the first word in this segment.
Here's what I have to say about what Jamie said. Jamie says that people can't vote if they don't have photo IDs. It's just not accurate. If you go to the polls and you don't have the right documentation, you can still cast a vote. You cast a challenge ballot, and if it turns out you're a legal voter, your ballot is going to be counted at the certification.
Won't the election have been called by then?
No, and that's not accurate. Until the election's certified, it's not certified. When media goes out and reports on election night what happened, all they're reporting are the preliminary totals. Until the certification hearing several days afterwards, we don't know the final numbers. So no, your vote will be counted even if you bring the wrong documents, unless you're an illegal voter.
You don't look like you're convinced
his
at
head.
all.
I'm not convinced at all. Who wants to cast a challenge ballot? When you go in to vote, you're voting for your person. And so you don't want your vote counted, 10 days from after the election, because then they get the box of challenge ballots and go through to see, well, let's see if this person was actually, nobody wants to vote that way.
Are we cracking down on absentee voting and Saturday voting, and how do you feel about that? And that's going to have to be one of our last questions, each of you. Saturday voting and
my
absentee voting.
My problem with the lengthy absentee ballot period is it creates problems in campaigns. People don't get a chance to make closing arguments. Votes are cast before the campaign's even finished many times.
Well, it is a problem. It's going to be a problem in Florida. I mean, they have closed the window because they saw that Democrats and Barack Obama were successful in getting a lot of their voters to vote early. And so that's the problem. Again, it's all political. It's not really racial, it's political, but with racial undertones.
So will there be efforts across the country to try to talk to people about the efforts that the Democrats see as voter suppression, and will there be efforts across the country on the Republican side to urge more efforts that actually ensure the verification of the right to vote.
Republicans are scared to death to advocate on these issues for fear of being called racist. And I have to say, Jamie here is intellectually honest when he says it's not racial, and I appreciate that. I really do.
You got, okay, 5 seconds.
There are groups. The DNC has a great website that tracks voting rights all across the country, and I'm a part of a group called protectingourvote.org. So go to that website.
Jamie Harrison and Todd Kincannon, always a pleasure. Thank you very, very much.
And the final word for the primary in June, don't worry about voter ID. That's what people need to know. Just go out and vote.
Just go out and
That's what
vote.
they need to know.
Exactly.
Last word. That's it for this edition of On Point on Watch Fox. Send us your comments and suggestions to onpointwithcynthia.com or go to the Facebook page. Thank you guys for watching. We believe when you're informed, you're empowered. Once empowered, on point. See you next week.